America's false sense of relief. By late 2024, Americans were told inflation had been tamed. News anchors pointed to cooling inflation charts. Economists talked about a soft landing. Policymakers assured voters that the Federal Reserve's aggressive rate hikes had done their job. But history warns us, inflation rarely ends because leaders declare victory. It ends only when the structural forces driving price increases are permanently resolved. And in America's case, most of those forces are still firmly in place. In fact, several of them are quietly getting stronger. This is why many economists now worry about inflation 2.0, a second wave of rising prices, driven not by pandemic stimulus, but by deeper economic constraints embedded in the U.S. system itself. Inflation 2.0 won't arrive suddenly. It won't feel like 2021 at first. It will creep back slowly through rent, insurance, healthcare, energy, and everyday necessities. And by the time Americans realize it has returned, it may already be too late to stop. Why inflation never truly disappeared. 1. The misleading nature of inflation numbers. Headline inflation numbers often hide reality. The Consumer Price Index measures averages, but Americans don't live in averages. Housing, healthcare, insurance, food, utilities, and education continue to rise faster than wages. Even when inflation falls, price levels remain permanently higher. Only the speed of price increases slows. The damage to purchasing power is already done. Inflation is cumulative. Prices don't reset, they lock in. This is why many Americans feel poorer even when inflation data looks better. 2. Interest rates treated symptoms, not the disease. Federal Reserve rate hikes effectively crushed demand. Home sales slowed, credit usage declined, venture funding dried up, but supply problems remained untouched. Housing shortages, energy constraints, aging infrastructure, labor shortages. The Fed cannot build houses. It cannot drill oil. It cannot train workers. It cannot fix supply chains. So when rates come down, the inflation pressure returns. 3. Historical parallel. The 1970s inflation trap. In the 1970s, inflation cooled temporarily after rate hikes. Policymakers relaxed too early. Inflation returned much worse. Rates had to rise even higher later. This is known as stop-and-go monetary policy, and it destroyed purchasing power for a decade. Many economists fear America is repeating this cycle. 4. The federal debt machine. U.S. debt isn't just high, it's structurally inflationary. When debt reaches extreme levels, raising taxes becomes politically impossible, cutting spending becomes destabilizing. Default becomes unthinkable, inflation becomes the only silent solution. By inflating the currency, the real value of debt shrinks, government obligations become easier to manage, citizens absorb the cost indirectly. This is why persistent inflation often follows periods of extreme debt accumulation. Global ripple effects. How the world reacts. 1. Foreign governments are dumping dollar assets for the first time in decades. China reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings. Japan slowed new purchases. The Middle East diversified. BRICS stockpiled gold. Foreign central banks are reducing exposure to the dollar because they fear long-term inflation. Geopolitical risks. Declining U.S. global influence. This slow withdrawal weakens the dollar further. 2. Gold is becoming the new old safe haven. For thousands of years, gold was the ultimate store of value. Suddenly, countries are buying gold at the fastest rate in modern history. Why? Because gold cannot be printed, cannot be frozen by sanctions, cannot be devalued by a government, holds value during economic distress. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold in a single year, a record high. Gold demand equals dollar doubt. 3. Shifting global trade patterns. Countries are building alternatives to the U.S.-powered SWIFT system. China's CIPS, India's Unified Payments Interface, expansion, BRICS payment systems, regional settlement networks. This reduces reliance on U.S. banking and U.S. currency. 4. Dollar sanctions weaponized. A backfire. When the U.S. sanctions nations, it freezes their bank accounts, dollar reserves, access to SWIFT, but this made other countries realize, if it can happen to them, it can happen to us. So they started reducing dollar dependence to avoid vulnerability. What it means for America and regular Americans. 1. Imports become more expensive. A weak dollar raises the cost of electronics, cars, clothes, raw materials, fuel. Because America imports more than it exports, consumers feel the pressure quickly. 2. Inflation stays sticky even if the Fed cuts rates or tries to cool inflation. A declining dollar keeps prices elevated. America could experience higher grocery prices, rising rent, more expensive healthcare, higher interest rates for longer. 3. U.S. global power declines. Dollar dominance gives America three major powers: economic power, easy borrowing, geopolitical power, sanctions, military power, global funding access. If the dollar weakens significantly, borrowing becomes harder, sanctions lose impact, global influence shrinks. 4. Investments change forever. Americans may shift toward gold, commodities, foreign stocks, real assets, cryptocurrency, hard assets like real estate. The traditional all-dollar portfolio becomes risky. Final conclusion: the US dollar isn't collapsing tomorrow. It's not disappearing, and it's still the world's most used currency. But global confidence is changing, slowly, structurally, and permanently. For the first time in decades, the world is preparing for a future where the U.S. dollar is not the only anchor of global finance. And that shift, whether it unfolds over 5 years or 25, will reshape global markets, wealth, geopolitical power, and the lives of every American. The dollar crisis is not just about currency. It's about the balance of global power, and that balance is moving.